In today's video, I am going to be breaking down 3 of the biggest mistakes that basketball coaches can make. Obviously, these are not all the mistakes that coaches can make. There's about a half a trillion of them. However, I'm going to be breaking down kind of the 3 biggest ones that I personally see. So the first biggest mistake is not having a plan. And this could be anything from having a game plan to having even a practice plan to know what we are going to be practicing. So of course, when it comes to practice, we have to look at the players and say, okay, what do we need to improve? Do we need to improve individual skills? Or do we need to really work on our teamwork, our ability to play help defense, things like that? And that's when a practice plan really comes in handy. You can get a basic practice plan that will kind of go over a bunch of different skills. For example, some of the ones that I have down in the description below that you can grab for yourself. Or do you want to have really directed practice plans where, hey, my team just cannot dribble and pass the ball. They can shoot, but they can't dribble and pass. Really need to work on that. And there's a ton of different drills and, of course, plans that you can get that you can really orient around those 2 skills. However, overall, having a practice plan will really help your team improve much faster. And then when it comes to games, you should also have a plan. I'm going to give you a little bit of a secret of mine, which is I contact other coaches to see what other teams are doing. So not necessarily the same coach all the time. So for example, I may contact a coach out in the other part of Hamilton about a team that I'm about to play, and then I might just contact that same team that we played about that other team that I just talked to about. Get what I'm saying? Like kind of talk around to other coaches so that you can kind of see what other teams are doing so that you can kind of plan around that. And if you're coaching a club team, AAU or rep, you can be in a tournament and look at and watch other teams and say, wow, number 11 shoots that 3-point shot really well. We should probably watch out for that man. Oh, number 11 also likes to do a back cut, or at least cut back door when he's being overplayed. He's a very smart player. We need to write that down and say number 11, we have to really watch out because he's smart. He can really read the defense and he can somehow get open for threes. Maybe the team will set elevator screens, staggered screens, whatever it may be for his just ability to shoot. And that's why we should watch out for him. And things like that. And of course, I'm going to be creating a list or at least a book very soon for coaches to be able to scout other teams and things to look for. However, this is just a brief overview of some of the mistakes that coaches make in this video. And that is just not having a game plan and not having a practice plan. You should really, really try to have a plan for pretty much everything. The second biggest mistake is something that I also kind of not necessarily do all the time either. However, not setting expectations. And of course, we can go into a season or go into coaching a team and saying, hey, like, let's win the championship. Okay, well, that's expectations, but what about expectations of the individual player? Hey, go up to that player. Hey, like, you are a very good shooter. I want you to shoot that ball more. If you can shoot the 3-point shot more in game, not necessarily more consistently, but just more in volume overall, I'm going to be able to give you more playing time on the court because you have a good shot and I want you taking those shots. Or, hey, you're like the 12th man. These are some of the things that you really need to work on. And if you work on these things over the season, you might be able to get more playing time throughout. And things like that. I try to set expectations with individual players. That's not always the case. I currently coach 2 different teams, and each team has 14 players, and usually I'll set expectations for the top 7 or 8, and then for the last half that generally don't get a ton of playing time, I'll just tell them the basics of, hey, we need you to really work on your shot, because these are the players that I generally develop, and for future years, let's say I might lose a starter to a bigger school, and at that point I would be able to fit in those players that I've been developing into those more playing time roles, maybe a starting role later on. And I really try to develop the last, I would say, 5 to 6 players on my roster, mainly because I want to be able to fit them in case I have a couple of starters who go on to bigger and better schools. And if that's the case, then at that point, I really want to try and develop their individual skills and say, hey, I really want you to try to work on getting a consistent shot. Here's some drills. I really want you to maybe get in better condition. You don't want to be too slow on the court. I'll be throwing you in on the game anyways, and you're going to see some of the things that the other team can exploit around you. You should try to fix that. Things like foot speed, maybe get down maybe a little bit of weight potentially, depending on the player. Maybe work on your handles or whatever it may be. Everyone, again, is different. Everyone has different skills. And then when they start really showing that they are really working on their game, if I'm watching them and saying, wow, they're coming early to practice, those are the players where I'll start really sitting aside with them and saying, hey, here's a plan for you to really work out with what you need to do. Instead of just saying, hey, I want to see you work on your shooting, I want to work on your handles, I want you to work on this and this and that. Okay, here's a directed plan, a 6-week plan. Here you go. I took the time and effort to put this together for you because I seen that you put in time on the court. I'm putting in time with you now. Here's a plan, and this is where I expect you to be in that 6-week time frame. And not all players will put in the work. Some will get discouraged, and then you still have to bring them along. You can't just leave a player behind. I always like to explain to my players, hey, if I ignore you, that means that I no longer care about you, and I care about every single one of my players. Even the players who disagree with maybe a play call that I had, I still care about them, and I'm not going to get angry if they're angry with me. We're going to work this through. I don't care if you're the 15th man on the team. I'm going to be helping you improve. I'm going to tell you what you need to do. And then once you start showing me that you're actually working on something and that you're putting in the time, I'll put in the 1 to 2 hours worth of time to build a plan for you so that you can get even better. And this is how I explain it to my players. This is what you need to improve on. Here's some of the drills that you could do. If you show me that you're working on improving this by coming early to practice, maybe taking a few shots after practice, whatever it may be, then I will put in the 1, 2, or 3 hours worth of effort to build a plan for you specifically to improve. But you have to show me first that you're willing to improve your game. I'm not going to spend 3 hours, 2 hours, or whatever it is of my time if you haven't shown to me that you're willing to improve. That way, I put onus on that player to want to improve instead of me just basically giving them everything. I want them to show me that they're willing to improve. You have to put onus on a player. And then third is something that I see actually a lot of as a coach myself, but even as a trainer when I go to players' games. Some coaches tend to have favorites. Now that sometimes can be where it's a parent and who is coaching the team and they just want their kid to play all the time, and that makes sense because of course that's why they're probably coaching. However, it's also the fact that sometimes you just have favorites. I'm going to give you a very, very, very good example of this. And that is when I was a first-year coach, my first year coaching a club team. That's kind of like, we have rep up here. It's basically our version of AAU. And basically, I had one player who I strongly disliked. And I've never had a player, even after this, that I've ever had a player that I disliked. He was mouthy. He would barely show up for practice. He was mouthy. He would try to pick fights with everybody. And there was nothing that me or his parents or even other executives could really do to fix or at least help this player get over his aggression. And as far as I know, he still has it. He, however, is in the Australian NBL, and that is kind of the other part of that, which is you can have you shouldn't have favorites, but if you did have favorites, and let's say you had your 6 or 7 favorites on the team, and there's that one kid who you just didn't have, he wasn't your favorite player, so you didn't maybe play him as much as you probably should have, and he goes on to another team, and of course, whatever the story may be, he then later ends up in a professional league. He now hates your guts, and there is nothing that you could do to really try to mend that relationship. And now, I'm not saying that this is a true story between me and a player. However, I want you to try to avoid that. Now, of course, he had a ton of aggression. He had all of this, but I still think back, even this is like 12 years now, 10 years, 12 years, something like that. But I still look back and say, wow, like, I wish I could have maybe done more to be able to help that player, because maybe and a story did come out where he did have a pretty bad home life, which actually explains why he didn't necessarily have a great attitude. And because of this, I feel bad that I couldn't have maybe helped him out during that time. So even if a player has a bad attitude, it's maybe not directed directly towards you, but just necessarily or unnecessarily towards whatever. I'm losing my words, but either way, maybe that anger is just directed to the world in general, and that's why he's showing that he's pissed off at everybody. So you shouldn't really have favorites at all, and those players who are not your necessarily favorites, who may have a bad attitude or whatever, I wouldn't necessarily say dig in to try to figure out why they're pissed off at the world, but try to help them out to try to get them along. And maybe that player, if I was able to help him out with his aggression that he was showing back then, maybe I could have helped him get rid of maybe some of that aggression and maybe help him out a little bit more to a point where maybe he could be in the NBA today. It's hard to say. So all I want to say is, overall, number 1, have a plan, whether it's a game plan or a practice plan. Number 2 is set expectations. Basically, that will help you be able to kind of navigate around playing time issues. Hey, your kid is 8th on the bench. This is how much playing time he's going to have. This, and that. There. And then 3rd is not to have favorites. We should never really have favorites, whether you're a teacher or coach or whatever. Of course, there are times where that may just happen, where you're just like, I cannot stand this kid on my team because he's just yelling and screaming or whatever. But I've been in that situation where I've had those aggressive players and I've kicked them off teams. And that one kid I kicked out of the gym quite a bit. And I probably shouldn't have done that, and I should have tried to figure out what I could do to help his specific situation out. And that could have actually helped him get even farther than playing in another, a really good league still, but he's like one step away from the NBA, and maybe he could be there. Anyways, that's my thoughts on the 3 biggest mistakes of basketball coaches. Anyways, I hope that you've enjoyed. I'll see you guys again next time.